just finished taking off that tux. I am at the wedding of a longtime family friend, one of my former students. And I thought in this episode we might talk about some things related to performing weddings and doing premarital counseling and so forth. So I welcome you to another episode of Ministry Matters That Matter. Okay, today let's talk about performing wedding ceremonies. It's going to be an important part of work in a local congregation. And the reality is, even though I haven't done local work in several years now, since I moved into Christian higher education, I still do a number of weddings and funerals. And we'll talk about a funeral some in a later episode. But let me just talk about weddings in this particular ceremony. Just finished one about 2 weeks ago, so it's still very fresh on my mind. When you do weddings, weddings and funerals are two of the most critical moments in someone's life. And so for me, there's added pressure. And I want to do a good job. I also want to make sure that everyone involved is relaxed. So when someone reaches out to me about performing a wedding, we look at things like, when are you planning to do this? What date do you have in mind? Most of the time when they reach out to you, they've picked a date and you're either free or you're not free. Sometimes people will want you to do it so badly that they will ask you when you're available and try to find a date to match it. But most just kind of assume you are going to adjust your world to fit. Or if you can't, then the date is often the key deal breaker. They've got a date, they want to do it. That's when the venue's available. That's when the family's available. So you just have to see if you have it in your schedule. You have to factor in travel to and from, what you have on both sides of it. There's going to usually be a rehearsal on a Friday night, and then the wedding is going to be on a Saturday. So, I want to know what time do I need to be there? Like, when do you think rehearsal dinner is going to be? When do you think the rehearsal is going to be? Where is this going to take place? Is the rehearsal dinner near where the rehearsal is? I just want to know all of those logistics, and you've got to think through how long it's going to take you to get there. How late is the wedding? Is it a morning, afternoon, or evening wedding? Where do you have to be on the next day? So if you've got a wedding that's at 5 o'clock in Wichita and you've got to preach in Tennessee the next morning, that probably isn't going to work. But if you've got, a 10 or 11 a.m. wedding on a Saturday in Wichita, you might can hop a plane and get back to Tennessee, by that next day. So these are just some things to think about. Make sure you factor all of that in and all that is involved in agreeing to do that wedding. So typically when I'm doing a wedding with a couple, here's some things I do. I typically try to have 4 meetings, which are usually around an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. One of those will be a logistics discussion where I'll ask lots of questions about details related to the wedding. And then I'm going to have 3 sessions typically that are going to be basically premarital counseling. And so I have some PowerPoints that I use. And so I've got a little screen on my desk if they're sitting in my office, and I'll throw those passages up there. Years ago, it's been many years now, the movie Courageous, I've got some video clips from that I use to start discussions in those sessions, and I've got some things that I focus on. So I want in those 3 sessions, they have to agree to do those sessions. In those sessions, the first one, I'm trying to talk them out of it. And I will tell them that. I'll say, I'm glad to do this wedding, but I want you to know in the first session, my goal is to talk you out of it. I need to make sure that you're all in for this and that you're in for life. So I've actually had 2 couples who chose not to get married after we had gone through all of those discussions. Now, what role my comments played in it, I don't know. But I know at least twice. I often say, hey, it worked twice. You could be next. I just need to make sure that first session they understand the permanency of marriage, what Scripture teaches about marriage, about making commitments and making vows to others and making vows in the presence of God. So we focus on those kinds of things. And then in other sessions, I'm going to want to talk about what it means to truly love somebody like Jesus does. We're going to talk about things like celebrating the differences and working with those differences, that God intentionally made men and women different. And we've got to celebrate that, work with that, get to know each other, ask questions. We need to make sure that we're centered on God and Christ, that if we're not right with God, it will impact our marriage. And so we're focusing on their relationship with God, learning to love each other the way God loves them. We're going to talk about kindness and forgiveness and mercy and making God the center of their world. And you can reach out to me. I'll be glad to share with you more detailed things I do. There are others that have certifications in premarital counseling, and they use those certifications and workbooks, etc. I've just got a system that works for me, but you need something. Don't just plan a wedding. You need to make sure that the couple that's about to get married, they're ready for this. And, one of the things I'm wanting to find out is if they even have a scriptural reason to be married. So I think of a couple who came to me and wanted me to perform their wedding ceremony. And when we started talking about it, I realized it doesn't look like to me you have biblical authority to get married. Now, they went shopping around, found somebody who would do it, but I just didn't feel comfortable doing that. To my knowledge, only one couple that I've married, their marriage didn't make it. To my knowledge, all the rest have. The point I'm trying to make is it's more important that you talk to them about being committed for life and loving like Jesus than it is to get all the details worked out in the wedding ceremony. So that's what I do. I try to have those 4 sessions. When we have the logistics discussion, I'm just looking at some notes here. I actually have a handout, and I kind of walk through, some things I need to ask them, and I want the details of when, where, and how. I encourage them to often the wife-to-be is the one who enjoys doing all the details. That's not always the case. But I encourage, lay out everything you can about what the rehearsal and about the wedding. What time do you want everybody there? When do they need to be dressed? Are you doing pictures before or after? Are you going to have a first reveal? Are you going to have pictures on both sides? I want the names of family members. I want the names of the people involved in the ceremony. So when we get to that rehearsal dinner, I don't want to be, or when we do that rehearsal on Friday night, I don't want to be saying, "Hey, you," for the whole time we were to get there. So I kind of want to know how many are involved in this ceremony. I encourage them. They may not have all of these answers right there at that meeting, but I'm just saying, here's the information I would like to have. I find out who is the wedding coordinator, find out if they have a wedding coordinator. If they don't have one, then you work it out with them to get one. And, I've been times that my wife had to become the wedding coordinator, etc. You need to work all of that out. First of all, make sure your wife's okay with that. But there needs to be a person standing at the back of that auditorium that has the schedule in front of them and tells people where to be and tells them when to enter. What I say is the wedding coordinator sends them to me. I'm responsible for them when they get to me until I send them back to the wedding coordinator. And I tell the wedding party, our job is to think. Your job is just to enjoy the moment and follow directions. And if everybody does that, then we're good. And so find out who the wedding coordinator is. If you can, find out if they've ever done a wedding before. So, and then you probably need to have some conversations with that person. I encourage it usually ends up being the bride, but I say, before that rehearsal, I would like a layout of what you want everybody to do before the ceremony. So if it's a 3:00 ceremony, do you envision seating the grandparents at 3:00? Do you have grandparents you need to seat? Who all needs to be seated? So we'll walk through who you envision being seated formally. I mean, you have folks coming in, and they may have ushers, taking them to a seat. You want the bride side or the groom side, etc. But Are there grandparents that you want seated as part of the ceremony, or parents being seated part of the ceremony? So how many of those do you have? Sometimes they'll have great grandparents that are going to be seated, and just encourage them to think through that, lay out an order. And when does that start? Are you going to start seating the grandparents at 10 minutes before the official time of the ceremony? So if it's a 3 o'clock ceremony, are you going to start seating them at 2:50, 2:55, or is everything formal going to start right at 3 o'clock? You just need to know those kinds of things. They need to tell you how people are going to come in, and that wedding coordinator needs to know that. And I want to lay out for both of us and for the person doing the music. So, before we come to rehearsal dinner, all of us need digital or print copies of all of this. And so we will, just walk through those kinds of things. Are they coming in as couples as far as the people involved in the wedding? Are they going to come in, like some weddings, they'll walk in pairs. Sometimes the guys will come in and then the girls come in. Sometimes the girls will come in, the guys will come in. Do you have a ring bearer? Do you have a flower girl? Knowing if there are children involved is a big deal. Okay, because you just never know what kids are going to do, and they just sometimes freak out on the asteroid. And I usually kind of break the tension at the rehearsal dinner by saying, hey guys, I'm sorry, but everybody's here to see what the kids will do. But I just want folks to know kids are kids. A 5-year-old's a 5-year-old. They're not 50 years old, okay? They didn't go through a formal training in what is the etiquette for a wedding. They're 5 years old. So just things happen. So the more you can have planned, and the more you are prepared for things going awry, the better it is for everybody. So I just want them to get all of those details. If they don't have it that night, that's okay, or that afternoon. But I'm just saying, here's the kinds of things that you need to be getting down on a piece of paper so that we can then follow that plan at rehearsal dinner and at the actual wedding. I tell them, just write as much detail as you possible. Let's see. I ask them, hey, do you envision a unity candle in this? If so, where do you picture putting it in the ceremony? What role do you want to play in the preparing of the actual ceremony? I'm not talking about decisions, the logistical decisions about what order people are going to go in. I'm talking about the actual ceremony, the part I'm going to say. What role do you want to play with that? Now, I'm still going to write my sermon part no matter what, but some like to play a huge role in that. Some don't want to touch it at all. They just want to be married when it's over. Some are kind of a mixture of that. So I just want to know, do you plan to do your own vows? Have you seen some vows you want? What about the I do's? Tell me about the rings, all those kinds of things. I just want to ask all of those details. And do you plan to have a unity candle? When do you envision it happening? Will there be someone singing live during the ceremony, or during the unity candle? Is it going to be music played in the background? Do you have a person who's going to be handling all your music and all the sound? Who is that person? Because you've got to communicate with all of those folks, at least at the rehearsal dinner through the actual wedding ceremony. I will ask them, do you want to have a speak now or forever hold your peace section? Do you want to have an official giving away of the bride? Who's giving away the bride? I just try to talk about as many of those kinds of details as I can. I encourage the couple to get their ceremony or their certificate, the wedding document that they're going to have to get that prior to the wedding. And it's going to need to be at the courthouse in the location where the wedding is. You also are going to need to make sure that you know what allows you to legally do a wedding there. So just make sure that you can legally do the wedding there. I've known of places where you had to be bonded by someone local if you didn't live local before you could do a wedding. So you just need to, you can get online, local courthouse, wherever the city or county is, and that'll tell you those details. Most places, it's not that big a deal, but you do need to check into that. But I tell them to get the wedding certificate. Don't get it too early. In other words, don't get it. Those are good for a month. So I tell them, don't get it a month before the wedding because, hopefully nothing will happen. But if something happens and you've got to postpone a week, guess what? You've got to go get a new wedding certificate because that one is no longer valid because, severe weather caused you to push it back a week. You also don't want to wait till the day before because you're going to be crazy busy. And there's a really good chance you're going to forget, and we're going to be there to do the ceremony, and there's nothing for me to sign. So I tell them 10 days to 2 weeks before. That gives you a couple of weeks to play with if we have to postpone. Never have had that happen. Don't plan it ever happening, but just life happens. So it gives you a couple of weeks that if you have to postpone, that it's still valid without you waiting till the last minute. I'll talk to them about, okay, where is it going to be? In other words, who's bringing it to me? Because you've got to sign that when it's over. And you're going to have to find out. Some places you're the only one that signs. In other places, it has to be witnessed by someone else. So you need to find that out. Ask them if they, when they get that, talk to them about when they're going to get that to you. Are you going to bring it to me at the rehearsal dinner? Are you going to bring it day of? Just clarify that. And then you're probably, if you live locally, you can do it. But a lot of the weddings I do now are in places I don't live. So I need somebody local who can be trusted who will get that to the courthouse once I do all the paperwork. So we just talk through those kinds of things. Often it's the mother of the bride or the mother of the groom who says, here, I'll take care of that, and they'll get it to the courthouse. So just know who that is. If somebody else is going to sign it, then ask the couple, who do you want to be the other witness? And they'll pick whoever that is. And then I'll tell that person at the rehearsal, hey, after the ceremony, I'm going to come looking for you and we've got to sign this. I'll also often go to the photographer and say, hey, I'm getting ready to sign this stuff. Do you want pictures of us doing that? And they usually do. So you just think of any little detail like that. Make sure you keep that marriage certificate where you can find it. Make sure it's guarded and protected. Make sure that you don't lose it, because you're responsible for that, and you're responsible to make sure that it gets to the courthouse. Some states will have a tear-off portion that you can give to the couple when they head off on their honeymoon. A lot of them don't. So what I do is I take a picture of all the documentation, everything I signed, and I send a text message with that attached to it to the couple. Because often when they go on their honeymoon, where they're staying, the price depends on whether they actually got married or not. You'll have people get the honeymoon suite and they've been married 50 years or they're not married at all. Often there's a lower price if it's actually for a wedding and it's actually your honeymoon. So there are times when they're traveling, maybe they're getting on a boat, they're going out of country, when having a valid evidence, having some kind of evidence, because it's not been processed by the courthouse, but having a picture of it usually suffices. I don't think either having a Xerox copy or taking a picture of it hasn't worked. I've never had a couple say, hey, what you sent me didn't work, but I always try to make sure that I do that. So just get as many details as you can. So what I do is I have a general flow for the ceremony, and often I will give the flow to the bride and groom. I don't show them the whole ceremony. I want them to have a little surprise, but they give me input into what they want in it. And then I will give them kind of a flow of what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And I will do the same thing with whoever is going to be at the back sending everybody in, the day of coordinator, the wedding coordinator. And so like one recently that I just did a couple weeks ago, I've just got a simple thing that says, here's the order. The party enters. I welcome the audience while the bride, the groom, and the father are standing down front. I do a little mini, paragraph and a half sermonette thing there while everybody's still standing. I say, who gives this man to be married to this woman? I then do the sermon. Then we have the commitment section, which is the I do's, the unity candle, and the exchange of rings. I have a prayer, a final declaration, kiss the bride, the getting the bouquet back. I introduce to you, the bride and groom depart, the party departs, announcements, prayer, guests dismiss. So that's just a simple boom, boom, boom. Here's what's going to happen. But I just am able to make sure that everybody is okay with this flow based on feedback that I have from everyone. And so anyway, those are some things that I do. There are things I want from them. I want you to share me your story. Tell me how you met, fell in love with each other. Tell me your favorite things to do together. Do you have favorite songs, movies, restaurants, favorite dates you like to do? Just what do you like to do together? Do you have favorite scriptures that are important to you? When it comes to songs, it can be secular songs or, if you will, sacred songs. Are there ones that are important to you? Like for Cindy and I, we've never seen the movie, but our song was, I've had the time of my life. But they often have their song. So that's helpful to know because you can incorporate the words of that into the ceremony. Do you have scriptures you want us to do? So like the last one I did, they wanted that quote from Ruth chapter 1, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. And so a lot of times they want 1 Corinthians 13, and I just make sure I build that all into it. I ask them to tell me why they love each other. And so what I do is then I place those things within the ceremony, and all of that helps me to build the ceremony because I want what I talk about to fit their personality. So I have certain things I'll do in the ceremony to challenge them to think about having a good marriage. But how I talk about it may depend on their passion. So I've got had a couple one time they wanted a ceremony connected to Star Trek. I've had folks that they had a favorite movie, and maybe it was Harry Potter, and so I would tie things into Harry Potter. They may have loved fishing. I remember a couple talking about their first date was a fishing trip around a pond out in the country. So we're going to tie that in. So often in my sermon part at the beginning, I'm going to say, a lot of people here may not know your story, so let me tell your story. So that portion is each of them, me just reading what they said about how they met. And that's usually just kind of a sweet, cool moment. Then I move into my sermon part. In the sermon, there's certain things I want them to think about like love and commitment and forgiveness and putting God first, etc. But how I talk about it, I try to tie it into their passions and their loves. And, so I may say, your favorite song is this. And so I'll talk about it related to that. You met doing this. Well, as you think about that, here's what the Bible wants you to do as a good husband, good wife, to have a strong marriage. So that's just a flow I use. Before I do, like when they're doing the exchange of rings and stuff like that, that's when I'll incorporate some of these other things. So like I may read what he said about why he loved her right before I ask the I do question. Or I might do it right before we do the repeat after me for the exchange of rings. In other words, I asked you why you loved her, and here's what you said. Based on that love, are you willing, for better, for worse, richer, poor, whatever we decided on would be the I do section, etc. And I find by mixing that in, every wedding is unique, even though it has the same flow most of the time. It's unique and it's personal. It doesn't sound canned. It's tailored to that couple, and the audience loves hearing what that couple said. I just can't tell you how many times I've had comments about, oh, that was amazing what she said about him. And maybe I didn't know him, but what he said about her just made me feel good about this marriage. I literally heard that just 2 weeks ago. I didn't know him, but what he said was beautiful. They're going to be a great match. So that's the approach I take. I put the entire ceremony and the details of like when I'm supposed to come in. Am I coming in from the front with the best man and the groom? Or are we coming in with the wedding party? I just want to know those details. So, I put it all in my pad. And I usually do it in 14 font, so it's easy to see. And I tell the couple, like when we do the rehearsal, there's some things I tell them. First of all, we rehearse from the end. So I will come into the room in the auditorium, and I will ask the bride, the groom, and the coordinator, put people where we're going to be at the end of the ceremony. And then once everybody's where they're going to be at the end of the ceremony, I act like it's the end of the ceremony. So I'll say, I'll pronounce you husband and wife. You can kiss your bride. Not really right now. And then everybody exits. They tell them how they want them to exit, and they exit just like they will at the ceremony. Then we walk through how to enter like the bridegroom and the coordinator want them to. And the reason I start at the end is now they know where to stand. They already been told where to stand. And so we have no confusion about where they go. And I'll tell them, here's a general rule. You're always looking at the bride. So when you're up front here and you don't know where to look, you look where she is. If she's not in the room, then you're looking at the door she's coming through. And when she comes through that door and walks down that aisle, your eyes stay on her. When she gets up here, you turn to her. All eyes are on her at all times. That's how it works. So we'll talk about when we're going to have people stand up and sit down. I usually talk to the mother of the bride about the fact that she's the cue. When you stand up, the audience stands up. When you sit down, the audience sits down. But I also tell them that I've got my cheat sheet with me. Your job is not to think, oh, what do I do next? Your job is just to stand there and be in love and enjoy the moment. And my job is to pay attention to the details. And so I'll tell you what to do next. You don't have to memorize any of this. I want us to practice through it so it's not new to you when we do it tomorrow. But my job is to keep up with the details. So I'm going to tell you when to give your bouquet. I'm going to tell you when to get your bouquet back. I'm going to tell you which hand to put the ring on. All those kinds of things. You just enjoy and treasure the moment. So those are some things that I talk about at the rehearsal. I always challenge the wedding party. Don't lock your knees when you're up there or one of you is going to pass out. And, usually you can lighten the mood by saying, listen, we're busy. We're not going to stop for you. We'll just drag you out of the way and keep going. They laugh. Everybody's relaxed. But they remember then, hey, I don't need to lock my knees. During the ceremony, I have it all in my iPad, and I do a lot of color coding. So, for example, all my passages are always in green. All my main section headings are always yellow. Generally, if it refers to something directed to the groom, I'll have blue highlighting, to the bride, some kind of pink highlighting. But that's just what I do to track everything. And it has not only what I'm going to say and quotes and scripture, it has everything that's possibly in the ceremony, but it's going to include things like step out of the way so that when they do the kiss, you're not in the back of the picture. So just little details like that I put in my notes and I just look at them. But now I practice it enough that during the ceremony, I don't have to look at it a lot. The time when I'm reading my notes is when I'm reading a quote from them. The rest of the time, as much as possible, I want to be maintaining eye contact with the audience. So anyway, those are some things that I do in a ceremony that I find helpful. And there are other things that you might do. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions you might have. If there's anything that I can do, just kbrothers@hcu.edu. I'm here outside the venue here in Jackson, Tennessee. I pray that some of the things we talked about relative to conducting funerals were helpful to you. Remember that ministry matters because the Master matters. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Ministry Matters That Matter.